Philippines has been failing to invest enough in education, and the numbers prove it. The figures are coming from the report of the Second Congressional Commission on Education, or EDCOM 2, which was published just last January 28. It revealed underinvestment in Philippine education, resulting in a number of systemic problems. EDCOM 2 shares that the Philippines has fallen short of global standards, failing to meet 4 to 6% of GDP allocation for education. The report also highlighted misprioritized funding, with foundational education receiving the least budget growth compared to secondary and tertiary levels. EDCOM 2 is proposing evidence-based reforms to ensure a globally competitive education system for Filipino learners.
What do these numbers mean, and what can be done to fix the cracks in our education system? To help explain their findings and discuss reforms, we have Dr. Karol Yee, Executive Director of EDCOM 2. Welcome to The Big Story.
Thank you for having me. Glad to be back.
I'm so sorry that we only have 15 minutes to talk about the big problem that is Philippine education. I'm sure we can go for hours about this. But I guess in a way that you could summarize the most astounding findings of this report, what are the roots of all the shortcomings?
Right. So I guess I'll start with the lead, which was the funding on education. So funding on education has always been the largest relatively to other expenditures in education in the country, which is consistent with the 1987 Constitution. But when you analyze the funding in the past decade, what you actually see is that if you account for inflation, the growth has been flat. And then if you account for growth in student enrollment and look at per student spending, you will see that actually the increases have been modest. And in fact, beginning 2016, the increases in funding went mostly to senior high school, because we launched the program then, and then to higher education, because we launched universal access to quality tertiary education in 2017, 2018. But while all that was happening, our funding for the most important years of education, which is primary education, kinder to grade 3, has remained modest in terms of increases. And what we're saying is, education is important. It's good that we always have the highest share. But when it comes to prioritizing, we need to go right at the start, because our kids need a strong start. If you look at all other countries that have succeeded in their education system, that's where they begin. Nutrition, kids should not be stunted. They should have early education. And at grade 3, they should be able to be literate and numerate.
So minus inflation, the funding has stalled. Meanwhile, the student population net continues to grow?
Of course, yes. Yes.
Okay, and this starting to feel like deja vu, because we had you here after the release of Year 1 report, and this is the Year 2 report. And what stood out to me with this report, at least the salient parts, I haven't had a chance to get through the entire book, but emphasize, of course, early education, the first 1,000 days. We already talked about this last year. Have there been any improvements between Year 1 and Year 2?
Well,
and please tell us, give us some good news today, Mark.
Well, there was. There's a 980 million increase in the budget of DOH specific to nutrition to support early years nutrition. The President also called for a meeting with the secretaries of DOH, with the NNC Executive Director, with DepEd, DSWD, and DBM, and told them we need to get our priorities right. Starting this year, when we prepare our budget for 2026, sit down together and make sure that we are prioritizing the first 1,000 days. So that's actually a huge development, because right now, even the President is watching and making sure that moving forward, we will not commit that mistake.
After the first 1,000 days, what comes next is daycare or preschool, right? For the more fortunate.
Actually, hindi na daycare yung tawag, pinalitan na
Child Development Center.
Child
Development
To give it more gravitas.
Yes, and also, yes. And to also just focus, to also show that it's holistic development.
Because there's nutrition.
Nutrition and education and the other
physical
needs
even, right?
Yes,
that was part of the finding, that movement.
Yes, and actually just this week, before they adjourned the session, actually called for the recess, we filed the bill, and we passed the bill, passed BICAM already, and the BICAM report was ratified, amending the Early Years Act. So we've put a lot of the improvements that we were recommending into this new law that hopefully will get signed in the next month or two, which will fix many of the problems that we found were structural, that had to be addressed by law.
We actually did a documentary on this,
thank
right?
you for that,
So the DepEd actually led us to explore this problem in early childhood, and we discovered that a lot of the funding is dependent on how much budget the LGU has.
Yes.
So kung wari maliit na bayan, kung ito lang yung pondo, nasa desisyon pa rin nila kung magkano ibababa nila sa
Yes.
kanilang mga
Definitely.
development center.
Definitely.
So is that structure changed in the new
yes.
law?
So one is, DILG is now actually part of the ECCD Council and is co-chair with DepEd. They used to not be part of it. It used to just be the Union of Local Authorities of the Philippines. And so now there is greater teeth because then DILG pwedeng kumumpas sila to the LGUs na make sure to enforce it. Second, it was really inequitable, no? Because it's totally reliant on a special education fund, and SEF is dependent on the income of a municipality because it's 1% of real property tax. What we did was to put a provision there, fought for by our commissioners, that if you come from 4th and 5th class municipalities, there should be a local government support fund component where you could apply for funds to implement ECCD.
Oh, who's raising the fund?
It's national government compensating
okay.
for the.
So it's a subsidy from the
Yes,
national government.
Yes, because we need to do that. Otherwise, we will have nice laws, but there would be no resources.
Bukod pa doon, yung sweldo ng mga teacher
Yes.
ay allowance lang.
Yes.
So how is that
currently?
changed?
So right now, under the law, well, under the what will be a new law to amend the Early Years Act, if you're a child development worker with NC3 in early childhood education or an associate degree, you will have a salary grade 8, so you will have a plantilla position. And if you're a child development teacher, you will get SG11, similar to teaching in a DepEd school. So moving forward, LGUs will now have plantilla positions, and then the child development workers will not have to be
That might
subsisting.
displace also a lot of teachers who are volunteering in these
Right. No, so
childhood development centers because a lot of them are not licensed,
Right,
qualified,
right,
have
right.
not graduated, and that's the sad reality
Right,
of it. But
for
they've
sure.
dedicated their whole lives
For
to teaching
sure.
the young kids.
For
so
sure.
what happens to them?
So we made sure that we have 70,000 really charitable, generous,
Yes.
committed child development
It's
workers.
basically a voluntary
Exactly,
almost
exactly.
job. Yeah.
And the commissioners, our senators and congressmen, made sure that there was a provision there that the transitory period was sufficient enough. We also put 80 million in scholarships this year for their upskilling, and that there would be
okay.
also equivalencies in education. In the world of education, equivalencies or recognition of prior learning means if you've practiced it for 20 years, we can have a checklist because if you know the competencies already, you don't need to take the course. We will
so
give
may
you the
parang
certification.
test. So you're exempted.
Yes.
Well, that's good because last year when we were talking after the year 1 report, wala pang ganito. So this was a big
So
achievement.
this is yes. So actually there are good wins naman, at least
good
for early
wins.
childhood
Because you are
nutrition.
going now into the specifics of the problem, so
Yes.
it's
Yes.
clear to us.
Yes. Same,
Then-
same with
Yeah.
us. Same with us.
Then
same
again,
with
Mark,
us.
a new problem has cropped up in the higher grades, the
Right.
principals issue.
Yes.
Some schools, no
Yeah,
principal. What's
yeah.
going on there, and what are you guys doing to try to address that?
So we were very surprised when we found out. No, to be very candid, we did not think that was happening until we had that hearing and asked about. So how many principals do we have? How do we make sure they're getting the training they need? How many exit the profession and retire? And then when we found out, and DepEd was able to crunch the figures, we realized that half of our schools apparently did not have principals. Some of them had head teachers, some of them had OICs, some of them had teachers in charge. So there were very many iterations. The 2001 policy of DepEd gives so many responsibilities to principals. They are the ones who do the appointments of teachers, they assign teacher loads, they have hiring decisions, they have admin decisions, financial decisions. So it's very critical that each school has a principal. But there was a 1997 policy that said that if you only have 9 teachers and above, that's the time you get the principal. If you have 6 teachers and up, you only get the head teacher. But beyond that, it was quite silent. And so what we're saying is there's a need to update those policies to be really responsive to the realities we're facing today. And also second, appointment of principals kasi is devolved. So we're saying decentralized, decentralized, but actually many things are also already decentralized. The decision to appoint principals happens at the division level. And so what happens is you have 200 plus divisions, and central office needs to be able to monitor 200 plus. And you know, in Leyte, for example, one division handles 1,200 schools. So how do you actually monitor?
Sorry, so is there a shortage in principals or it's just being hampered by an outdated law?
So both.
Okay.
Okay.
So in some schools, we actually don't have positions for them. In some schools, there are positions, but they're not getting filled yet because the NQuesh, which is the principal's exam, are conducted yearly, but during the pandemic, it stopped. And then some years it also stopped, and passing rates were dismal.
That's what I heard.
Are there
Yes,
enough
yes.
qualified? Are there enough qualified people applying for
So
principal
right-
positions?
Well, there are enough who take it. In 2016, 3% passed.
3?
Yes. For the past few years, it's been 30%. So right now, we have about almost 8,000 qualified who could fill positions. And
There
so,
was talk, though, that they would tweak this exam somehow,
Yes,
right?
yes.
Is it really too hard, or is it another sign that maybe we need to train our teachers more?
right. So I think that's already the direction of DepEd now, no? And we're very glad, and we've been working closely with them. So one, Secretary Angara has committed that they will really push for each school to have one principal. One school, one principal. And second, to review it. Because when we were in Singapore, so we traveled to Singapore together, and we saw that there, they don't wait for people to just take an exam to qualify and then they get appointed. They're actually very purposive. That
So they
early on,
scout?
they scout those with leadership potential, they stream them to training, they slowly groom them so they have good succession planning. So that's the direction of DepEd
It's easy
now.
to do for a small population.
Exactly,
Not
exactly.
for a country with
Exactly,
110
exactly.
million people.
But I guess having the right intentions is a good start, and then let's figure out how to implement it. But
As-
at least now everyone knows about the concern. People are concerned and are decisive
Yeah.
about it to make
How
a
heavy
solution.
are those qualifications
Well,
to
it's
become a
I haven't
principal?
seen the exam myself, so the next step maybe is to
But,
review
but
the
you
exam.
do you have to have a like a master's degree?
Yes.
PhD,
Yes.
meron lahat yun.
So
Masters,
it's pretty
at least.
high bar.
Yeah.
You know, as a parent of young kids, trust me when I say that I'm a huge proponent of early childhood education. I've seen,
Yes.
you know, firsthand the differences, right? And I hear you when you say that the issue is misprioritizing of funds. But how do we solve this problem when tertiary education also has a lot of problems? Secondary education also has a lot of problems. How do you
Right.
take money away from that without hurting those demographics and, you know, putting more into early childhood education?
Well, we're not proposing that we cannibalize ourselves no, in the education sector and eat up funds from elsewhere. We're saying that
No more money, period.
no, we're saying that we need to invest more in education. And if we need to invest more and we're putting in more resources, let's put it in the foundational years. Because what are we seeing? We worked with the PSA to revise the FLEMS. No? The FLEMS is the Functional Literacy Assessment, which you will find in our report. For the longest time, we've been very proud that we had one of the highest functional literacy rates in the world. If you would look at all of the statistics of government, it was 90% plus for the past decade. But when we asked them how it was computed, comprehension was not part
Yeah.
of the definition. As long as you could read a sentence, that counts as functional literacy. As long as you finished high school, that's functional literacy. And so we worked with them closely in the past year to revise it and then to simulate the findings.
So you've tweaked the metrics.
Yes. We've worked with PSA to do that, advocating closely with DepEd as well. You find out that when you recompute it, it drops to 62%.
I was going to say, so the numbers like dropped. And how
Yeah,
bad was
yeah.
the drop?
62% now from 90+%. And when you look at it, so we didn't stop there. We said, okay, so 30% are actually not functionally literate. Is that just now? Is that just, has it been happening? And how does it differ if you're a high school graduate or a college graduate? We crunched the figures and it's there also in the report. 30%, regardless,
Are functionally literate.
not functionally
Not
literate.
functionally literate.
Even college graduates, 50 years old and above, we have about 30% who
What's
are not
wrong?
functionally
What's
literate.
wrong? What's happening here?
They could not comprehend complex sentences.
As the PISA report said, it's happening to our children, but what we didn't know was it's happening to
It's
even
been
grown-ups.
there for a while. It's been there for a while. That's why we're saying now, yes, senior high school is important. Yes, TechVoc is important. College is important. But we all need functional literacy.
To even get there, we need to start from the
Exactly.
bottom.
But how do we
Exactly.
begin to solve that problem?
So what we're saying is, we need to make sure that starting here on, no grade 3 student progresses to grade 4 without being able to read and being able to add and being able to... So I asked my dean,
And
no, who
That's,
are mostly
that's already
teachers.
in
Understand.
place, Mark. Isn't it? That's already a requirement. They all need to learn to, they all need to know how to read.
On paper, yes. But we
add.
need to be vigilant in actually making sure that that is
Hindi ba
happening.
nakatulong, nakadagdag dito yung pandemic that the teachers had to pass?
For sure.
Well, students because it was a different time.
Yeah, so I guess we really have to call a spade a spade. No, the pandemic was a tough time for all nations anyway. It was very difficult to make sure that there's continuity in learning. But even before the pandemic,
but if 50-year-olds have or have also flunked the test and flunked the metric, that
and-
means before pandemic pa.
and the UNICEF study followed students from kinder to grade 4.
Sorry, I'm very
Go ahead.
curious to know if you have any findings on the success of the K-12 program, on the employability of the graduates of senior high school. Do you have anything?
Right. So we have several studies conducted, but what we found is there's still some challenges there. That is what DepEd is now working on, because the industry people are saying there's not enough hands-on training, and so they're not easy to employ because they didn't have enough training. And so the revisions that DepEd are proposing now is that they will revise and decongest the curriculum, a lot more time for hands-on training, so that actually they are work
So K to 10, very quickly, K to 10, that's a go. The decongestion will be...
Yes, Matatag is being rolled out already, and K147 is now implemented, 2358
Right.
this coming school year. So
You have
it's
your
going on.
work cut out for you.
At least for one more year.
One more year.